In this episode, you are going to meet an engineer who's truly living out his passion. Stephen Hollabaugh is a licensed professional engineer, and he is the president and founder of Native Strategies. This is an amazing story. Stephen's background, his cultural background, he was brought up in a tribal nation, on a tribal land. And now, as a civil engineer, he realized that as a civil engineer, he could help these tribal nations to improve their infrastructure. And that's what he does full time. In fact, his company is growing fast. They're in over 10 states at this point. And in this episode, he is going to tell us his story about how he kind of married civil engineering with his passion and share some of his leadership philosophies around it. All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today. Stephen Hollabaugh is a licensed professional engineer and president at Native Strategies. Stephen, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Anthony. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. No, I'm really interested in talking with you, Stephen. And let's start off by you telling us a little bit about your journey in civil engineering and kind of what inspired you to start Native Strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Yeah. So obviously my name is Stephen Hollabaugh. I founded Native Strategies. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. I'm also a licensed professional engineer in over a dozen states at this point. Our growth has been crazy. My journey as a civil engineer, I've had several mentors throughout my career. Doug Glenn, president of CEC, Kelly Harris, who's the president of Bancroft, and then Jeremy Boswell, who is chief development officer at CP&Y now STV. And then my biggest mentor has been an individual by the name of Ambassador Lynn Caleb. And Ambassador was the ambassador for the Chickasaw Nation to the United States. He was also the first Secretary of Transportation for Oklahoma. And I went to him 4 years ago and said, Ambassador, I have a crazy idea. I'm thinking of founding my own engineering firm with the focus of increasing the structure of life and the sustainability of life, specifically focused on Native American tribes and their citizens. And he said, Stephen, I think you're nuts, but I think you should do it. So he's been my biggest supporter and kind of encourager at the beginning as we started, and then kind of as we've grown as well.
That's amazing. I mean, first of all, I think just generally speaking, for anyone to start a business and grow it is a challenging, speaking from my own experience, it's definitely a challenge. And I know that it sounds like you're growing fast. And so that means there's a lot of moving parts that you have to juggle. But let's go back for a minute, because I don't think any of our past guests have mentioned Cherokee Nation. And I think for our listeners, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, what that means, explain it to everyone just to set the scene here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I said, as I mentioned, I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. So being raised in a culture and a background of tribal sustainability and what that means for tribal citizens, not just environmental sustainability. Infrastructure as it relates to civil engineering and tribes, it's a kind of a rough way. It's been, there's been a lot of degradation over the several years, past decades. And so one of the biggest challenges that we wanted to tackle was, how do we improve that standard of living? How do we bring out adequate drinking water? It sounds crazy to think that, we're all within the United States, but reaching out to some of these reservations, it's almost as if it's a third world country, even from access to drinking water, to potable water. So it's been a really fun kind of a mission that we've started as a part of our firm. So
that's interesting. And so in your area, Stephen, there are tribes right around you? Is that where you are and where you operate out of?
Yeah, so I'm primarily in Oklahoma. We are a fully virtual firm, so we have offices and locations throughout the U.S. But there are 39 tribes here in Oklahoma. And maybe a fact that may not be known to some of our listeners is that there's 574 tribes throughout the U.S. Each of these tribal nations operate differently, but they all operate and control their own infrastructure. So yeah, it's we work directly with the tribes as well as with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and our federal agencies that support and fund some of these different projects.
That's really interesting. So essentially, you're providing civil engineering support to these tribes.
Absolutely, yeah. Civil engineering and construction management is really our focus for these tribes.
Wow, that's awesome. So, Stephen, in what ways do you think your cultural background has kind of shaped your leadership style and some of your business strategies and the way that you've grown?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So when I think about my leadership style, the culture that I was raised in is one out of listening. And it's something that we typically bypass whenever we get the point to have a conversation or we get to talk. We want to do the talking, right? Our instinct is, I want people to hear what I have to say. And really the way we approach it in my leadership style is one of asking questions to gain information from those that we're speaking with. So using that listening is a key component of everything that we do. And I guess
that's great. I mean, that's a critical part of leadership, right? I mean, if you can't, I mean, in my opinion, I think it's critical. I don't think everybody does it. I think it's critical though, because if you don't understand what your team needs, how can you serve them?
I agree. Absolutely. It's your team, it's your clients, it's the end user, everything that you're looking at, you're listening for that. And then when it comes to business strategy, how does that relate to how the culture I was raised in and more of a tribal background as well? It's one of endurance. So it's a lot of times it's easy, especially, as a founder of a company, that there's a lot of people, I would say 80 to 90% say, oh no, you can't do that. There's no way. And you have to look past it and you have to just push the pedal down and say, I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it. So yeah, our vision or the way we approach our leadership team is the decisions we make now, we're making as if we're 5 years in the future, the company size that we hope that we'll be in 5 years. And so there's some that I'll talk about a little bit later if we get into it, about the different tribes and how they project the tribal nations and they lead their companies, their nations. So yeah, that's how we lead our firm.
That's interesting. Take me back for a minute. Let's go back a little bit. You mentioned your upbringing a few times and, being brought up in a tribal culture. So tell me about that, and then how you found civil engineering as a career. How did that all happen?
Yeah. So it almost happened by accident, I would say. So started out in the construction world, realizing that, man, doing construction in the summers is hot. And in the winters here in Oklahoma, it's cold. So you try to decide, do I want to be out in the yard and on the field doing construction all day long? And so the biggest merge of that was, okay, where can I take my construction experience and marry it with something that's more technical? And so that's where civil engineering came into play. It's kind of the merriment of the two.
And the idea to bring it to tribes only came, I guess, once you decided to start the business and you started thinking through how you could help. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing where it really spawned from was seeing the need. Obviously, I was working for a larger engineering firm doing civil engineering design from, grade separated interchanges to water lines, and started to talk to some more of these tribal leaders and listen to them and understand the struggles that they were having, where they wanted to go, and realizing that I wanted to make an impact in that area. And I wanted to create a firm that could not just touch one tribe, but could touch all tribes throughout the U.S.
That's great. I think that's the real sign of a leader is a lot of people have ideas, but you got to try to put them into action if you really want to make something happen. And there's kind of a big gap between having the idea and kind of seeing it through. So, kind of kudos to you for following it through there. I know it's a big leap, but
I appreciate that.
So Native Strategies, you mentioned, operates as a fully virtual firm. So yep. How has kind of the adoption of this virtual and remote work environment contributed to the success or the efficiency of your projects?
Yeah. So, being fully remote definitely has its challenges, right? But it also has some really big benefits for us. We have employees that are located all the way from Alaska to Florida. So being able to touch these different tribal nations and respond quickly to these projects and their needs, to get out and visit with the tribal leaders, to visit with the citizens, it has increased our efficiency significantly. Just being able to have our employees not travel as much, because some of these reservations are fairly remote. Took a significant drive in order to get there. And so having people located kind of throughout the US has definitely increased our efficiency. Obviously, with the improvement to technology with Microsoft Teams and being able to get on meetings as a whole, our efficiency has increased, and there's been less, I'll call it water cooler time, but we still have that connection in our daily and our weekly meetings. We're still able to get that community involvement, that community feel, just not as we've lost the day-to-day of all of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. No, we've operated for the most part virtually too at EMI, and I think that there are definitely some benefits from an efficiency standpoint. And I think that there are, sometimes where I wish that we would get to see each other more, but I think you got to, strive to make that happen from time to time. And I think that'll benefit your company. But I absolutely think the remote atmosphere definitely offers flexibility. It removes barriers from, where you can hire people from, which in your case sounds really beneficial. It's a big deal. And I think that gives you a little bit of an edge too, in terms of like hiring, which is great.
It really has, in total transparency.
Just for the audience. Yeah. I mean, cause it's, it's a barrier that you're lifting now, right?
Yep.
So in terms of like, just again, for the audience, cause I know that the idea of, these tribes and where they're located is not something that people know a lot about, generally speaking, just like for people to understand kind of the breadth of the operation, just give them an idea of like, and you could rattle some of them off, like the states and where there are tribes and where you might work. Cause I think a lot of Americans that I know think like maybe there's a couple of states where there are, tribal lands and they don't really understand the breadth of it. So maybe just mention a few where you work a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So one crazy statistic is that there are only, I think it's 10 states within the United States that do not have a tribe in that state.
Wow.
So, I mean, whenever you look at it,
that's crazy.
There's 574 throughout the U.S. So some of the projects that we've worked on today are Turtle Mountain Band of the Chippewa Indians in North Dakota, Chickasaw Nation, Cherokee Nation here in Oklahoma. We've done a lot of work. Obviously, there's 39 here in Oklahoma. We do a lot of work for the Navajo, which is out in Western U.S. in New Mexico, Arizona. We're working right now with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe in southwestern Colorado and southeastern Utah. So, I mean, that's just to name a few.
You're all over.
They're literally everywhere. I mean, then you go down to Florida and we've got the Seminole Nation that we're working with. So, I mean, like, there's literally every single part of the U.S., there's a tribe associated with it.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting because, when we started doing podcasting, I mean, listen, the name of this podcast is the Civil Engineering CEO. So, people could be like, how many civil engineering CEOs are out there, that you could interview? And I could interview one a week, quite frankly. But it's to your point, like when you get into like one of these niche environments, like people think it's small, but it's really for a business, it's, probably a lot more than you can even handle, right? There's so much out there. So I think, again, that's the value of, finding out what you're passionate about, finding that niche that you think you could really flourish in, and then like putting your resources into it. And I think you just end up seeing a lot of opportunities open.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree.
So let's go back to your team a little bit. We talked about you being fully virtual.
Yeah.
Can you share any like specific initiatives or practices maybe that you've implemented to kind of support the well-being of your team members? I know when we're working virtual and, there really isn't a clear line between like work and home, it can become a little bit stressful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. It can't, because if you're driven, and we're all driven, right, as professionals, so you have a hard time removing yourselves from, I mean, I actually put my phone across the room so it wouldn't bling during our conversation. Sort of, right? I mean, it's like whenever you leave the office, the phone's right there still, right? And it's always going off. So one of the things that we've implemented, we call it 4-core. So it allows us to connect, but also to remove. So the 4-core is we set 4 hours. Every single employee, it's not the same 4 hours because we're separated across the US, right? So, but those 4 hours, it's when we can expect, like if we've got to pick up the phone and call you to have a conversation or we need to talk about a project, then we know that we're going to be available and that employee is going to be available. And then outside of that, the other 4 hours, you get done whenever you can. And so we've got several, as a family first and fully virtual firm, we've got some guys who the best time that they get the most work done is from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. Like, that would work for me. That's absolutely nuts. But their family's asleep. They're in bed. They've got the 4 hours they spend in the day when they're at school. And then they've got the 4 hours that they spend fully locked in and designing in the middle of the night. So it works for them. And honestly, it's increased our efficiencies as well.
That's really cool. So in those 4 hours where you're available, you might still be doing stuff, but you're doing it in a way where people can access you if they need to.
Yep, exactly.
That's great. That's great. We're doing a lot of work on that here at EMI right now and looking at our workflows and how we can, make things less frenetic for people for certain parts of the day. In fact, I just reread Cal Newport's book, A World Without Email, which is fastly becoming one of my favorite books because he does really talk a lot about how we've created this atmosphere of, if I don't get back to you in 10 seconds, that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah,
The mindset.
absolutely.
Yeah. And in the world of civil engineering, you certainly need, blocks of like this deep work that he calls it, where you're doing design, you're doing reports, where you can't have that interruption. And if you do, it's like a lot of brain switching, and it causes a lot of inefficiency. So I like that 4-core a lot. That's really cool.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, it's obviously, you mentioned the research and switching the brains. Everything that we've researched, it takes 26 minutes on average to get into the groove of design. So when you talk about email and phones and Teams messages, so every time a new one comes up, it takes you 26 minutes to get back into the groove. So it's just something that we consider being fully remote.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to your, that block of quiet time that you give everybody there, where they don't have to lose that 26 minutes.
Exactly.
So Stephen, let's get back to, what you guys focus on there. And talk to us about what role do you see civil engineering playing in improving the standard of living on these tribal lands?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, obviously that's part of our vision, is to increase the standard of living. We do it with the two words we focus on are humility and skill. Those tribal lands, the infrastructure is falling apart. Some of it's not even there. When we talk about fiber and how easy it is for us to just hop on the internet or to research something or to make a phone call, they don't have access to that. So communication still lives in that no email world that you referenced. So going back into how can we play from a standard of living on the civil engineering side, access to potable drinking water, sanitary sewer collection systems that actually work, stormwater. Most of these places don't have stormwater. It just runs into channels and canals, into ditches and streams. There's environmental sustainability. It's incredibly important to the tribal nations. But then there's also, almost more important, is cultural sustainability and sustaining what their heritage, and then from a spirit perspective, how that is pushed through as well. So
that's interesting. So would you say that your designers and a lot of your team members are really need to learn about the tribes and their cultures and their belief systems to do their job?
Absolutely. And part of that is us listening. So we do a lot of research before we go out to a reservation to visit with the different tribal nations and the citizens there to understand some background. Specifically, like if we're going to a Navajo reservation, we want to understand what that chapter has as an important value to them, and then what they may be concerned with. We're doing a lot of work with the Shanto chapter of the Navajo in Shanto, Arizona, and understanding what's just the heart of their mission and what infrastructure they need. Water pressure is a huge one out there. They have a little bitty town of 3,000 citizens and 3 water towers, just because they're trying to get enough pressure to sustain. So we do a lot of research, and our employees, we teach a lot of that knowledge and how to research that before they go to the different reservations.
Now, are you the only team member or employee that has a tribal upbringing and background, or are there others?
I'm not. We actually have several of our team who have a background of tribal citizenship and understanding and culture. Yeah.
That's great. I would imagine that's would be a good hiring strategy.
Yeah, it's pretty, we have, obviously as professionals, we want to hire high quality, high caliber individuals. One of our other initiatives is to hire tribal citizens that may not have known that there was a career outside of something on the reservation. So we fly drones. We've got several commercial drone pilots, and that is taking an individual that may not even have a high school degree and turning them into a licensed professional, to where now that they're able to contribute as a professional service firm back to their community as well as other communities that are close to them.
That's awesome. I love that. And I think that's, civil engineering to me is about community. And, you're really connecting to the community in that way. And, obviously everything that you're doing at Native Strategies is very community driven, but I mean, also by hiring or interacting with people, on those tribal lands, it's bringing you kind of full circle into what you're doing. And it's probably, I would say, really important to what you are doing, because you need that inside knowledge to be able to help you do your job.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about Native American leaders. How can they influence some of the policies and the decisions that affect these tribal communities? Because I would imagine that that's a big part of this.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. It really is. And so, I mean, last week they had in Washington, D.C. was the National Congress of American Indians met in order to continue some of those conversations on the legislative side. And I personally travel to DC at least once a quarter in order to meet with some of our different senators and stakeholders to make sure that there's an initiative there and that there's a drive. The Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, provided a lot of funding that went to the tribal nations. And some of the plans that we think of, there's things called travel transportation planning and the long range transportation planning that we do for these tribal nations, that then they get some funding from the BIA in order to sustain their roads, to build and maintain their infrastructure. So the tribal leaders that we work with several chiefs, several presidents, that they're each elected by their own citizens. It's the actual election where they're nominated and they go through the process, just as we do at the federal level and state level within the U.S. These nations go through that same process. So we work with, one of the ones that we've worked most closely with is Chief Harper, the Peoria tribe, his initiative to grow their tribal nation, not just like from a citizenship perspective, but grow the economy that's within their nation to sustain is really something that they focus on.
That's really interesting. And I would imagine too, that the ability to interact with some of these chiefs, it has to be a really interesting, conversations and, learning a little bit from them in terms of leadership and what they've had to do leading, on these tribal lands where there is a lot of barriers to overcome.
Oh my word. There's so much to learn from them and so much to gain. And I'm blessed to spend so much time with the ambassador. He's been able to give me some of that wisdom and that insight. And it's all about respect. Respect them, be humble, go in and just listen to what their needs are and see how you can help them.
That's great. No, and I think that, again, I think a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is stuff that people just, we hear about, Native Americans, but we don't know that much about them, right? You see a movie, you watch some documentary, but we don't get to talk to people like you that are working with them on a regular basis and was brought up in that way. So I'm really happy that you're, spending time with us here and talking a little bit about this. So I'm just interested as an entrepreneur myself in terms of your business. What do you see? It's obviously a very niche business, like we said. It sounds like it's an awesome initiative. But what do you see for your business in terms of some of the challenges going forward? Because it seems like, there's a lot of nuances to the tribal lands and getting funding. Mm-hmm. So what are some things that you as the leader have to really work on so that you can continue to grow Native strategies so that you can continue to help more tribal nations?
Yeah, absolutely. There's several different challenges and things that we forecast. And so I mentioned how we make decisions 5 years, as if the decision's out 5 years in the future. Yeah. The tribal nations, they look 7 generations into the future. So working with those chiefs and those leaders, they're not thinking about our generation, our kids, our grandkids, grandkids. They're thinking 7 generations into the future whenever they're making a decision for their tribal nation. So one of the struggles that we personally as a company have is trying to figure out where we will grow and how we can support all of these different tribes with their different initiatives. So we're continuing to expand our services, and we just added environmental compliance, doing NEPA reviews and environmental assessments to make sure that we're able to continue to hear and listen to the needs and be able to support them and grow in those areas. So,
wow. It's awesome because basically you're learning philosophies from your clients and using it to grow your business. Yeah. and help them. You're using it to help them more, basically.
Right.
It's like a circle, which is, a circle that works kind of for all the parties, which is cool. So that's pretty awesome. All right. So Stephen, based on everything that you've done so far in your career, what you've done with Native strategies, for those maybe engineering professionals that are listening, maybe they're entrepreneurial and they're looking to make a real significant impact in the industry. And maybe they want to get involved with this initiative and help out with tribal communities. what would you say to them? Like, what are some things that people can do to get involved?
I would say, so research a tribal community that is close to you. Do some homework on them, because there's one, I guarantee you, no matter where you're at in the US, there's a tribal community that is close. Listen, go to some of their meetings, their business committee meetings or their elder meetings, and just listen to what their struggles are. And then see, as a professional in the civil engineering space, how can you take those courses that you're going through, whether it's, those who are in school, whether they're going through fluid dynamics or they're going through structural analysis, how can they take that knowledge and parlay it into something that may be beneficial to that tribe? And just to ask themselves those questions and to go back and forth. And so, you'll see behind me is my engineering seal and a tomahawk that I was gifted from the Navajo Nation. So, how do you take the two and marry them together and then go for it and don't stop? Just drive yourself and just pursue your passions. So.
That's awesome. I think I'm going to go run through a wall after this.
I love that.
No, I want to thank you for taking some time. I know you're really busy. You're helping a lot of people, which means you're probably running all day long, but I appreciate some time. What you're doing is amazing. And I know a lot of civil engineers are going to listen to this episode and they're going to get inspired by it. So once again, Stephen Hollabaugh, president at Native Strategies, licensed professional engineer, and he's doing some very special things. Stephen, thanks again for spending some time with us here on the Civil Engineering CEO.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. It's been enjoyable, and I look forward to all this in the come.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Stephen. He's doing amazing things, and the fact that he's been able to marry his engineering knowledge with his passion is just something that's so cool, and I hope that many, many more engineers can do just that. If you enjoyed my conversation with Stephen, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.